switch now to CBS.
7 from Boston to Los Angeles had 92 people on board. These were large airplanes capable of carrying more than that, but that is still a significant loss of life. In addition, the FAA has just told us a short time ago that there is now somewhat of a new concern. There are 22, we should say at least 22, international flights still in the air at this moment bound for the United States. There was some question about what should be done with those flights. The New York airspace is closed. The Washington airports are closed. Apparently now a decision has been made to allow the international flights to land. We're not sure exactly where. It is common when there are weather problems to divert those flights to either, say, Boston or Atlanta, even perhaps as far south as Miami. But I don't believe, from what we've been told, that they will be going into the New York or Washington area. In addition, there are also 50 domestic airline flights that are still in the air. These are planes that took off this morning during peak rush hour times and who literally were caught in the air when this terrorism attack unfolded. Even though the national aviation system has been closed down, those 50 planes obviously will be allowed to land, and the FAA says that it does not see any particular problem with that. One further point, picking up on something correspondent Jim Stewart said a while ago, the planes involved in the attacks this morning were widely used, readily accessible commercial airline planes, 757s, 767s. And these are fairly easy to fly. Now, I say that with the understanding that if you have a rudimentary knowledge of flying, certainly if you're militarily trained, even if you are a civilian pilot, even of moderate skills, these planes are relatively easy to fly. They can be difficult and touchy to land, but in a situation where we saw that they were used basically as flying bombs, it's not difficult for someone with some rudimentary skills to take the control and sadly steer that kind of an airplane into a building. I would agree with what Jim said earlier, and this is in the realm of just theory and speculation, if you will, but I know a number of airline pilots have been through a number of their training programs, and I can't envision an airline pilot deliberately taking his plane into a populated area or into a large high-rise like the World Trade Center. He would, I think, in almost every circumstance, force the hijacker, if that's what it was, to take control in some kind of commandeer mode. So we're still getting preliminary information from the FAA, but certainly as far as the people on board the airplanes, the death count is not as terrible as it might have been at first blush. We're still checking, Dan.
Bob Orr in Washington. You're looking at videotape of earlier this morning. You saw a terrible scene, never to be forgotten, a haunting scene of bodies coming down the side of the World Trade Center building, one of them before both buildings collapsed. In one of the most audacious attacks ever against the United States, terrorists hijacked at least 2 airliners and crashed them into the World Trade Center in what appears to be a coordinated series of blows, the blows that brought down both of the World Trade Center 110-story towers. A plane also slammed into the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon, hit a helicopter pad, then we're told, and then set fire to portions of the building. It brought the seat of the U.S. government itself under attack. There's never been anything like this in the history of the United States. This is something unique. Thousands of people are believed to be dead or injured. That's according to a high-ranking New York City police official who did not want to be quoted by name. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said, "I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost." That's a quote. And another quote, "Right now we have to focus on saving as many lives as possible." The incredible amount of debris, steel, concrete, plaster, and what have you, now envelops what were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. In that debris, there may very well be some people alive at this moment. Efforts are being made to determine that. Authorities have been trying to evacuate those who work in this whole area of the Twin Towers. Many people are thought to have been trapped. About 50,000 people work at the Trade Center. American Airlines said that its 2 aircraft known to have been hijacked were carrying a total of 156 people. Fate of those people unknown, but one has to believe that many, if not all of them, are dead. Chris Yates of Jane's Transport of London said this is perhaps the most audacious terrorist attack that's ever taken place in the world. Another quote from him: "It takes a logistics operation from the terrorist groups involved that is second to none," unquote. Now, Mr. Yates speaks of terrorist groups. There are those in diplomatic and intelligence circles who would believe that this kind of attack perhaps could not be coordinated and carried out on this scale without the help of some state governments, actual state governments. But that is, of course, speculation on their part. Nobody knows who brought this terror, this death and destruction, this horror to the United States. President Bush has ordered a full-scale investigation. By the way, we're told that the president will be speaking on videotape from a videotape made at Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana. This is an unexplained situation, but understandably, the government doesn't want to explain everything they're doing and all the whereabouts of the president. The president was known to be in Florida earlier in the day. Then we got the report that he'd be speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base. Then we were told, well, he'd be speaking on videotape. To sort some of this out, our White House correspondent John Roberts is in Washington. John?
And was because, frankly, it just was not safe here, or even if it was safe, the Secret Service could not be assured of the president's safety. When I came into the White House this morning, the Secret Service at that point had not declared an alert, and within about 5 or 10 minutes of my arrival, suddenly they were evacuating the grounds, and then they decided to go beyond that and evacuate the building itself. After the twin attacks on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, there had not been a national alert declared, but just about the time that I walked in the gate of the White House this morning, that other explosion occurred at the Pentagon, and that's when the Secret Service said, this is very serious, we're targeted here in Washington, we have to get everyone out. Now, the Vice President and his staff, who were in the building at the time, were evacuated. They have been taken to an undisclosed location. We understand that the Vice President is with his wife, Lynn Cheney, as well. Louis Libby, his Chief of Staff, is with him, and Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor. They have established an off-campus situation room. There is a situation room, Dan, as you know, in the basement of the White House, in which the leaders of the National Security Council and the military meet anytime there is a potential for a national emergency, or anytime that there is a serious threat against American interests abroad. Because there is a plan here in Washington to devolve power from all of the agencies and departments to take them to remote locations, there is a situation room that is set up in a location other than the White House. That's where the Vice President, we understand, is working out of. We have not been told of that location, but we do understand that he is in charge of the national security aspect of this, along with Condoleezza Rice and his Chief of Staff. President Bush, I think, had intended to come back to Washington. He said in his statement this morning from Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, he said, unfortunately, I'll be going back to Washington immediately after my remarks. But obviously the Secret Service believed that it was not safe for him to come back to the White House, not safe for anyone, even at this point, to be within blocks of the White House. They have an immense cordon around that historic building, Dan. And one of the so-called doomsday aircraft, one of those 747s that had been dispatched to fly around the country as a command and control center in the event of nuclear war, in fact, had established a secure air corridor over Washington, and we saw a couple of F-16s flying over the area as well, just in case one of these aircraft may have been headed for the White House. I mean, they had to figure that if the Pentagon had been targeted, that one of those aircraft, not saying that it might be the one that went to Pittsburgh or not, but one of those aircraft could well have been targeted at the White House, and there just are not the defenses on hand at the White House, at least as I understand it, to knock something like a 757 out of the sky. So, Dan, this area is still not seen as safe. That's why the president is in Louisiana. We'll be hearing from him shortly from Barksdale Air Force Base. Dan?
And we're told, to repeat for emphasis, John Roberts, that the president will be on videotape from Barksdale Air Force Base. Certainly there will be those from the Hate America centers who will take some satisfaction in that the President of the United States cannot return to the White House immediately. On the other hand, the Secret Service and other agencies in matters such as this understandably want to be super safe, super cautious, and that's what they're doing under these circumstances. This is an unprecedented attack on American institutions, on the American people, on our own home ground. Unprecedented, never happened in this scale in the 20th century, never has happened in the 21st century. This scene from ground level in New York, the World Trade Center area, shows you what the conditions there are. And Russ Mitchell is here with more details about New York hospitals being overwhelmed with the casualties. Russ?
That is correct, Dan. New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says right now the city is utilizing some 50 hospitals in the area, and that's expected to climb to 100 hospitals by the end of the day. He is also urging residents to leave lower Manhattan, the area where the World Trade Center towers were. Strange to say that, but where they were. As you have said several times today, Dan, all of New York is about on fire, but downtown Manhattan is awful chaotic, and complicating this situation is all subway service in Manhattan has been suspended. Subways, the way many people, millions of New Yorkers get to work every day, that subway service has been suspended. Therefore, people are being urged to walk, evacuate lower Manhattan. Another concern that city officials have is many police officers and firefighters are believed to have been injured in the blast downtown this morning. And beyond New York, the U.S.-Mexico border has been closed, and the U.S.-Canada border has been closed as well.
Russ Mitchell. Authorities in Washington immediately after the Pentagon was hit began deploying troops, including an infantry regiment. This is a precaution. The Situation Room at the White House is in full operation. Vice President Dick Cheney in charge with Condoleezza Rice, head of the National Security Council, at his side with their aides. Authorities are on alert from coast to coast. Air traffic throughout the country has been halted, and there's been a significant tightening of security at strategic installations. American Airlines identified the planes that crashed into the Trade Center as Flight 11, a Los Angeles-bound jet hijacked after takeoff from Boston with 92 people aboard, and Flight 77, which was seized while carrying 64 people from Washington to Los Angeles. Just pause for a second. New information is coming in, and information is being concerned. American Airlines now says that 2 of their planes were crashed into the World Trade Center. First, Flight 11, Los Angeles-bound out of Boston, 92 people aboard. How did the hijackers get control of that plane? How did they crash it into the building? It has the signature marks of a suicide mission, of course. And then the other American Airlines flight, 64 people from Washington to Los Angeles, crashed into the World Trade Center. Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, news alert. President Bush says military on high alert status. Bush says he has taken all appropriate security precautions to protect Americans. There'll be more coming. This from the videotaped talk to the American people that President Bush has made. Now, keep in mind the president was in Florida. It was believed he was going back to Washington. In fact, he said he was heading back to Washington, but instead he's apparently gone to Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana, and we're expecting to have the videotape of the president's remarks for you at any moment now, but what the president said is coming over the wires, and that President Bush said the United States has taken all appropriate steps to protect the American people. The president says that we will hunt down and punish those responsible for the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. If you're saying to yourself, well, I've heard at least one American president say that before, you are correct. That President Clinton said that after the first attack on the World Trade Center and after the attacks on the American embassies in Africa, and indeed after the attacks on the American embassies in Africa, a twin strike by cruise ballistic missiles, 2 strikes, one launched in Afghanistan and another to Sudan, were taken after in 1998 after attacks which were believed to have been the work of Osama bin Laden and perhaps some state-sponsored terrorism groups connected with him. President Bush says we have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. The president in this new statement says, make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. The president of the United States says the U.S. military has been put on what he calls high alert status. He says he has taken security precautions to ensure the functioning of the U.S. government. The president cut short a trip to Florida following the attacks this morning in New York and Washington, but where the president is going to wind up, we do not know at this time. Instead of going to Washington, he apparently went to Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana, at least That is what we were told, and the videotape that we're expecting any moment from the president will originate there. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani reports rescue workers are finding survivors. Here's a ray, just a glimmer of New York. The mayor says Lower Manhattan looks like it was bombed in World War II. Well, it has been bombed in the World Terrorism War of 2001. Bombed in the sense that American Airlines says 2 of its planes were hijacked, and then they were we know not how, the details of them, but they were crashed into the World Trade Center itself. These scenes are where the debris is thick and the smoke goes like clouds and will for a long while in Lower Manhattan, on the edge of Greenwich Village, right at the tip of Manhattan, with the Statue of Liberty in the background. These attacks have occurred one day before the sentencing of an associate of Osama bin Laden in connection with the embassy bombings in Tanzania in 1998. The sentencing of this associate of bin Laden, and forgive my pronunciation, Mohammed al-Okali, the accused in that were convicted in a court here in Manhattan. They face the death penalty. They're charged with directly assisting the American embassy bombing in Kenya and in Saudi Arabia. In the background, of course, there was another terrorist attack in the Cobalt Towers in Saudi Arabia in the 1990s, still unsolved, although there were many in the U.S. government convinced that that bombing of the U.S. Air Force Towers apartment building really in Saudi Arabia was connected to the government of Iran. That was a belief, but there was never solid evidence put out to that. These are scenes from earlier in the day, but now we're going to take you to Belleville Hospital as soon as we can put up the pictures. New York hospitals are overwhelmed with the casualties. In Bellevue Hospital, every available doctor, nurse, orderly, working on cases of the injured. If you're saying to yourself, what can I do? One thing you can do is stay off the telephone. That would be helpful, particularly cell phones. The other thing you can do is think about, not at this moment, but think about contributing blood, because blood plasma supplies are going to be very short, to say the least, as New York City deals with an unprecedented situation in which the mayor has said and the police have also said there are bound to be tremendous numbers of dead. The leader of the Hamas organization has denied any responsibility in the attacks. Well, there'll be a long line of people denying responsibility for these attacks. Leaders of the Taliban, the radical fundamentalist Islamic group ruling Afghanistan, which have been in the process of protecting Osama bin Laden, we are told have been quickly gotten out what can only be described as a public relations operation, denying that they have anything to do with this. But all of that will be dealt with as time goes along. Scott Pelley, 60 Minutes 2 correspondent and another veteran CBS News correspondent who work here and abroad, is in downtown New York. Scott?
Dan, the last 3 hours or so, I've been down here a couple of blocks from the World Trade Center. We're just now getting the first wave of firemen and paramedics who have been working the scene around the rubble of the World Trade Center buildings. They're starting to walk out now as their shifts are replaced, and we've had an opportunity to talk to some of them. One gentleman, actually an elderly man, who told me he was a retired New York City fireman who ran to the scene when he heard what had happened to help out, described for us a scene in terms of bodies and body parts strewn all about the area around the 2 World Trade Center towers. In the streets, he described them, on the sidewalks. He said there didn't seem to be many walking wounded in the area. What he saw primarily was bodies and parts of bodies. He didn't care to estimate how many there were. I asked him if he could give me some idea, and he looked at me and said, it's countless. We also spoke with Lieutenant Rene Diavola of Battalion 4 here in the New York City Fire Department. He's an EMT. He was the first EMT supervisor at the scene after the first airplane hit the first tower. He told us that he was working triage when the second airplane hit the second World Trade Center tower. He saw the airplane come in and saw it cut the building, as you have already seen on videotape. It seems almost in half when it hit. He described the debris raining down on the firefighters, the paramedics, the police officers who were responding to the very first of the two plane impacts. He said, "I saw the building collapse. There was debris falling all around me. And at the point that the first building came down, he said that the firefighters were trapped in a swirling mass of debris and smoke, and he described how he and other firefighters literally held hands and walked up the street to try to get to safety. As soon as he found a telephone, he told me that he called his wife to tell her that he loved her." We have spoken to a number of firemen who have come out of there. You have to understand, Dan, the difficulty down there is it's impossible to see. I'm standing just a couple of blocks away. As you see on your live cameras, there's a huge towering cloud still above lower Manhattan. And down here on the ground, people are telling us that only a couple of blocks closer in, you can't even see your hand in front of your face. It's very, very difficult to work, to see, to breathe. One fireman stepped out of there and told us, "The world is an evil place. I know that now." Dan?
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. We've just passed the 1 o'clock hour in the east. A little more than 4 hours ago is when all of this started. 3 hijacked planes crashed into major U.S. landmarks this morning. They destroyed both of New York's 110-story tall towers, and they plunged into the Pentagon. This is the timeline. The South Tower of the World Trade Center was hit around 9 o'clock. Then the North Tower was hit. Air traffic in the U.S. was closed about 9:30. President Bush spoke from Florida. At that time, he's spoken since via videotape from Louisiana. Around 10 o'clock, a plane crashed at the helicopter pad at the Pentagon, did damage, set fire to portions of the Pentagon. There have been some casualties. Any dead, we don't know. There were some injured because we saw them at the Pentagon. Then the South Tower incredibly collapsed. Then the North Tower, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center collapsed. And one pauses after you say that because, you know, it's almost unbelievable. And then there was a plane crash in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. That's in the Pittsburgh area. Now, Pentagon spokesman Glenn Flood is just now quoted as saying, and I quote him directly, that there have been extensive casualties and an unknown number of fatalities at the Defense Department. That's the first time they've confirmed that there have been casualties. We go to CBS News Pentagon correspondent David Martin, our national security correspondent. David?
Dan, over my shoulder you can see the fire engine still trying to put out the fire that began when the plane hit the building. If you were at a different location, you would be able to see that that plane cut into that building just like an axe into a birthday cake. This is the west side of the building. People who were working on the east side of the building say they had their windows blown out and they saw a fireball. This for the largest office building in the world. So this plane caused extensive damage. Now, eyewitnesses have described a plane which the FBI decided was a description of a commercial 767 airliner or a 757, which would be consistent with the report of the airliner being hijacked, the American Airlines airliner being hijacked as it was taking off from Dulles bound for the West Coast. No confirmation that that is what happened. As to extensive casualties, certainly anybody that was on board that plane could not have survived that crash, and anybody who was in the direct path of that plane when it hit the building could not have survived. From a different perspective, you can see that floors 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all collapsed in on each other. It is a sight which I'm sure nobody in their wildest imagination thought they would ever see.
David Martin at the Pentagon, our national security correspondent. Jim Stewart, one of the best reporters in America when it comes to this kind of situation, has been working this story from the very beginning in Washington. And there's new information about the early reports of a plane crashing at or near Camp David, the presidential retreat outside of Maryland. Jim?
Dan, the FBI now is trying to sort together what has actually happened here and what they still don't understand. And what they do know has happened is, of course, 3 separate terrorist attacks in the United States: the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and some event that has occurred in Pennsylvania, including that affected a commercial airliner. Because of the proximity of that crash of the commercial airline in Pennsylvania to Camp David, there is a presumption by some in law enforcement that Camp David may have been the target of that attack. That, of course, was a hijacked commercial aircraft that we are told did not respond to repeated attempts to communicate with it either by the military or the FAA. Now, other things that the government is confirming at this hour: number one, they received no warnings. They had no hint of any attack against domestic targets in the United States. Number two, they have not received any claim for any of these attacks from anyone. And number three, although they have no evidence that this is the case, they are assuming and presuming that there could be additional attacks within the United States and are reacting appropriately. To do so, they have set up command posts, we are told, in Washington, in Phoenix, and in Los Angeles. Moments ago, the Attorney General of the United States returned from out of town. He was taken by an armored car convoy to the FBI headquarters. Would you ask him, please? Excuse me, Dan, we have a little bit confusion here in our newsroom at the moment. I can also say that the intelligence community is now saying officially that they do believe that these attacks have the signature, as one official put it, of the Al-Qaeda organization. That, of course, is the terrorist organization that is under the control of Osama bin Laden. They said that is, quote, our lead theory. Dan?
Jim Stewart in Washington. Now at Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, President Bush is about to come out. We believe this is live, although we've been told earlier that it'd be played on videotape. Here is the president. Well, folks, it's live television.
Let me just tell you,
I'm going to get up.
The president, CBS was having some technical difficulties there. President Bush says the nation's military has been placed on high alert status in response to the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon and the crashes of other aircraft. Mr. Bush says we will do what it takes, whatever is necessary to secure Americans.
All right, we were listening to CBS, and they said the terrorist attacks that happened this morning, the 3 separate attacks in New York and the Pentagon, and possibly a 4th plane down in Pittsburgh that may have been directed at Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland, had the signature of the Al-Qaeda, which is under the control of Osama bin Laden. We'll talk more about that, but we do have the tape of the president ready. Here's what he had to say.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status. and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
That was President George Bush in a taped message to the American people. The president was down in Florida at the time that the attacks began. He was taken to a Air Force Base in Louisiana.
Barksdale, Louisiana, outside of Shreveport, Louisiana. We're joined now by Dr. Gerald Post. We heard him earlier on the phone. He's an international terrorism expert and a professor of political psychology at George Washington University. Dr. Post, thank you very much for being with us. We heard CBS say that the bombing was the signature of the Al-Qaeda, which is a terror cell under the control of Osama bin Laden. What is their signature, and do you agree?
I recently had the opportunity of testifying in federal court on the trial of the
bombers before?
The bombers in at our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. That was unprecedented, the simultaneous attack on two targets within minutes of each other. The logistics to carry out the hijackings, to coordinate this in such a sophisticated fashion, I know of no other group that could have done this.
So Hamas and the Islamic Jihad coming out denying any involvement. Do you think they could have done it and could just be a red herring?
I do not believe they could have or would have done that.
Why would this group do this? What is it about Osama bin Laden and the United States that he wants to wreak havoc on this country?
Well, in many ways, he has come to be identified, especially since Kenya and Tanzania, as a major opponent of the United States, as in some ways with our promotion of the world's #1 terrorist. And unlike other terrorist groups, many of whom wish to get an international audience, for the radical Islamic terrorists, they are killing in the name of God. And thus they are able to really induce a number of alienated youth to join the movement and to be feeling a part of this.
Willing to give their lives, a suicide mission.
Incorrect to call it a suicide mission.
Why, sir?
Because suicide is proscribed in the Quran, seeking martyrdom, and they make this distinction again and again and again. And I've recently had the opportunity, we've gone now through some 33 interviews of incarcerated Middle Eastern terrorists, expressly addressing both the question of willingness to commit acts of mass casualty terrorism as well as suicidal terrorism. And the lack of a moral red line which would in any way deter them was quite striking. These were normal individuals. That's also what is quite terrifying.
Professor Post, we want to play a response from the Taliban to this morning's terrorist attack.
Does the Taliban categorically condemn these attacks on the United States?
طالبان به مرحله وارد بوده که امریکا باندې دغه حملې وکړي.
موږ د توریزم ټول انواع همیشه غندلې د پخوا څخه په دې باره کې پالیسي ښکاره.
Our policy was very clear from the very beginning, and we have criticized, and even now we criticize terrorism in all its forms.
Can you rule out any involvement by Osama bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden لاس درلود هیڅ قسم ته یا کوم یو قسم ته لاس درلودنه تسکیه صورت ردوي.
पुरुष पुरुषा तालिबानले रफ्ते तौर हमला दिले गए
No, up to now, no one has blamed or accused him formally.
No one has blamed or accused Osama bin Laden directly, but you agree with other experts that this has his signature, the Al-Qaeda terror cell.
Yes, I mean, this is a not unsensible, pragmatic reaction from the Taliban foreign minister, and it's quite notable given how impervious they are to opinion of the West, be it with the Christian missionaries on trial, or earlier with the destruction of the giant Buddhas. Now they're exquisitely sensitive because they're expecting retaliation against them for harboring him.
And he was also asking the entire Muslim world to be in accord with Afghanistan, which they are now saying is the heart of the Muslim world.
Well, one can look at Afghanistan as the heart of radical Islam in some ways. That's different from being at the heart of the Muslim world. And this is a major tension within the Muslim world that the moderates, and it's a moderate, merciful religion, and I don't think we should be mistaken into thinking of all Muslims as terrorists. And moderate Muslims decry this. However, increasingly, youth is being attracted to the cause of radical Islam.
Professor, thank you very
much.
much.
I wanted to ask one
Please.
more question, Professor. The President has said every precaution is being taken to protect America and American citizens. Given what you've seen today, given what we believe may be the group behind this, do we sleep easily tonight?
I don't sleep easily tonight, and one of the things this episode makes clear, despite our being the most powerful nation on earth, there is no ultimate protection against terrorism in terms of an intelligence target. It's almost impossible to penetrate these groups. Conventional deterrence does not work. Whom do we deter? Whom do we attack? So it is a daunting, daunting problem.
As an expert on international terrorism, how should we respond to these attacks?
Well, in the first place, I don't think we should leap to any kind of response. This just perpetuates the cycle of violence, especially if we strike out without it being clear. If we find this is associated with a particular country, then we may well wish to make a proportionate response. But if this is a sub-state terrorist group, such as the Al-Qaeda, whom I believe it probably is, I think our hands are going to be tied.
Professor Gerald Post, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
One of the terrorist targets, the Pentagon, took a direct hit. Dave Statter is there with an update. Dave?
We've just heard, as you can see, by the way, the fire still burns out of control here at the Pentagon. It would seem they have it somewhat contained, that it's not spreading beyond, too much beyond where we've seen it for the last hour or so. There have been some very brief briefings, I should say, from the Pentagon in a makeshift area. Mike, if you can just pan over to your right over here. Many people are familiar with the Citgo station, which is the naval quick mart, so to speak. It's only for military quick mart. It's only for military personnel near the Pentagon. This has been set up as a press area because, of course, the press cannot get into the Pentagon, and we're getting some briefings. We've heard from an admiral who said this today. We can't prepare for anything like this because this was a false assault on the United States of America. There's no way to prepare for that. Now, as Mike goes back to show you at the Pentagon what we're talking about here, it was an hour, I guess, after the assault in New York that a large jet slammed into the side, the heliport side of the Pentagon. There are people dead, not only on that plane, but inside that building, according to the Pentagon. They cannot give us numbers, but we've heard from a number of public affairs people confirming what has been so obvious to us this morning. They're dead, still inside that building. Firefighters not able to yet put the fire out. Great deal of smoke and fire trapped in what you would call the bowels of this building that firefighters are having a tough time getting to. We have on occasion seen fire flames pouring out of this side of the building. Heather, you have another eyewitness here?
We do. And I just misplaced your name. Tell us again, you were actually inside the building.
Yes. My name's Willie. I work in the basement on the north side of the building. And, well.
Yeah, we're not. Okay. Oh, well.
Sorry.
Thanks so much, Willie. I know you've been hanging out. So. Yeah, I know. Well, I might just grab you again and then we'll walk on.
Didn't mean to stab you with a pen.
All right, Dave Statter and Heather Cabot at the Pentagon, where that building is still on fire. Flames are still erupting, and the middle section, as you can see, has collapsed, and there is loss of life and dead still inside that building.
Many of the injured have been taken to the Virginia Hospital Center. Jennifer Ryan is there. Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes, Mike, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
We are here at Arlington Hospital. This is the primary hospital that is responding to all the folks that are coming from the Pentagon with injuries. We still have folks with the trauma unit out here on the curb waiting for more people to come in, and they do expect more. Right now, the number is at 26. All Pentagon workers, civilian and military. All 26 victims have been brought to this area with injuries that really range from cuts and bruises to burns, shortness of breath. They do have one person in surgery, and they do have 2 people, we're told, that are being ready to get discharged today. So their injuries definitely vary. We also have video for you. The video, absolutely amazing. The first patient arriving at 10:35 this morning. They came in all different modes of transportation, by ambulance, by personal vehicle. Some people loaded 2 and 3 deep with victims pulled up in vans and their own personal sport utilities trying to bring people here. Police cars brought people, military personnel brought people. Again, 26 in all at this hospital, and they are all Pentagon workers. We have a severe shortage medically in the city and around the area. We are in desperate need of blood in the area. If you can donate blood, you're asked to go to one of the blood collection services or call the Red Cross. They also need over at the Pentagon IVs, tubes, oxygen tanks. We've seen deliveries here today. The Red Cross came in with blood. We saw other hospitals. Sibley came in with all kinds of supplies today. They're also